just a little bit about CertiKit first of all. We're a leading creator of compliance toolkits and provider of ISO services. We're based in Derbyshire in the UK near the Peak District. And since 2010, we've helped more than 4,000 customers globally achieve compliance. And we specialize in ISO standards and data protection, GDPR, etc. And our mission is to make compliance easy so that more organizations can achieve certification to and benefit from their chosen standard or data protection regulations. I always kind of think well, maybe that should be easier, really, because I think we all know that being compliant, particularly to an ISO standard, is not always that easy, but we'll see. So I say my name is Ken Holmes. My background is in IT in a variety of technical and non-technical roles for private, public and charity sector organizations. I'm the main technical author, as Ted said, on the 27001 Toolkit. And I'm also responsible for running our own integrated management system within CertiKit. In fact, we had a 9001 recertification audit a couple of weeks ago, which I'm pleased to say we passed with no non-conformities. We get an appreciation of what it's like to be on the other end of an audit. And we really like to try and take that into the documents that we produce because we understand the pain, basically. So the 27001 Toolkit itself, we launched it in 2011. When the 2005 version of the standard was in force. Since then, we've updated it regularly, including across 2 new versions of the standard. So there was the 2013 version, and version 12, in fact, was the first version of the toolkit, was the first version to apply to the 2022 version of the standard. So this is a further update to that. Update to the toolkit has been significant, and people based in over 100 countries have bought and used the toolkit, which has grown over time to now encompass over 200 documents, forms, examples, and other resources, which can be used as a comprehensive library covering not only the management system, but also the Annex A controls. We sometimes get asked, 200 documents, that's a lot of documents, do we really need them all? And the answer is no, but it's really a library of available resources, depending on things like how many of the controls within Annex A you feel are applicable. And what we're aiming for really is coverage effectively, so that everything is there if you do actually need the documents, as well as a core of management system documents. So in terms of what goes into a new toolkit version, there's a number of different sources that we gather together before we embark on a new version of a toolkit. The first is the result of support questions. So customers buy our toolkits and they make use of them within their organizations to become certified. And obviously we get support questions that come in, and we love to get the questions because they give it a good indication of where the problem areas are, and we get lots of good ideas that we then incorporate within further versions of the toolkit. So every question that comes in is logged, and if there are any conclusions in terms of improvements effectively to the toolkit, then we have another place that we log those, and that's the first place we go to when we come to do the next update of the standard, of the toolkit. We also do an annual customer survey. So every year we sort of ask for feedback about what you like about the toolkit, and what you think could be improved, and so on, and various other things. So that's a really useful source of additional things that we can put into a new version of the toolkit. We have a team of compliance consultants as well, so who are using the toolkit documents on a daily basis with clients of CertiKit who are implementing 27001. So that's a really useful source of information and practical experience of what works and what doesn't quite work in terms of the documents. So we always have a good chat with our compliance consultants when we're looking at a new version to understand what's working and what needs a bit of a tweak. And you'll see some of that within version 13. As I mentioned, we have an integrated management system ourselves internally, so we're regularly audited, and any feedback coming back from BSI auditors, etc., who we use for our certification, we also incorporate that within the toolkit as well. And in addition to that, there's also any changes in the standards. They don't have to be big changes. I mean, the most recent one that springs to mind is the climate change amendment that came out recently across all of the ISO management system standards. And there are some external factors, particularly with a standard like 27001, such as changes to laws, so privacy updates, that kind of thing, and any technology changes, significant ones that are relevant to the standard. So we take all of these things together when we're looking at what needs to go into a new version, and we try and incorporate as many of them as we can. The process we use for updating is a fairly well-trodden one now. We have 11 toolkits in the range, and there are different version levels. Version 13 is probably one of the higher versions, but we've done this quite a few times now. So we go through a process of gathering requirements before we then sit down and incorporate those requirements into the toolkit. And we work out whether new documents are required, whether it's tweaks to existing ones, what works and what doesn't, and so on. And once we've got to a point where we feel as though we've got a toolkit that's worthy of the name sort of new version, then we go through a quality assurance process to pick up on any sort of slight errors, etc., that we may have made during that process. We then launch the toolkit, and obviously we have lifetime updates. So anyone that's bought the toolkit previously beyond a certain date will get the new version free of charge. So we basically tell everybody that it's available, and then they go onto our website and download it. And after that, once the toolkit is out there being sold, etc., then we provide support for it as well. A large part of it being those support questions that I mentioned. So we're going to review 7 areas in which the toolkit has been updated. This is version 13, as shown on here. So the first one is to do with artificial intelligence. Then we're going to go through some of the areas of confusion in the toolkit that we simplified in version 13. There's a bit of clarification around risk assessment. There's a significant piece of work really around supplier management as well, and the way that that's approached in the toolkit. There's a piece about consistency and policies, a bit about privacy and the GDPR sort of focus, and the fact that there are other privacy legislation around the world as well, and a few other changes that we'll also mention. So let's go through each of these in turn. So AI has come to the fore since the last version of the toolkit. So we've taken the opportunity to update the toolkit to take into account issues with artificial intelligence, including a new policy document covering some of the governance issues of AI. So the kind of things you see on the screen there to do with intellectual property protection, data security and privacy, compliance and ethics, etc. There's a huge amount of noise about AI at the moment, and what we try to do is to provide a concise policy that covers the main points. Not only in terms of the policy document, but also there are various other key documents within the toolkit that we've also updated to incorporate elements of AI, particularly around coding, development, etc., and compliance. I'm sure we'll be coming back to AI many times in future updates as the picture matures and as AI is used more and more, and also as the legal framework around AI, such as the new EU AI Act, takes force, and as the picture emerges. It's an exciting time for AI, and we'll see what happens over the next few years, and any developments we'll be certainly interested in incorporating in the toolkit. So in terms of simplifying areas of confusion, there's a few areas of the toolkit that have generated support questions and a bit of discussion. So we've taken the time to make the relevant documents a bit clearer. So let's have a look at each of these. The first is context, requirements and scope. So what we've done is that there is a document within section 4, so it's clause 4 of the standard. So this is where it talks about the context of the organization and so on. So the document as it stood previously in version 12, it was a very useful document, maybe a little bit lengthy. So what we've done is we've taken the opportunity to trim it down a little bit and to focus it more on the specific requirements that are in clause 4. So there's much more emphasis on external, internal issues, interested parties and their requirements. We've simplified the area that talks about organizational context. Previously, we went into quite a lot of detail about products, services, etc., which is all useful information. But some of the feedback was that perhaps we don't need to go in as much detail as that. There's also a few references within this document to risk assessment and objectives that we've moved from this document into other parts of the toolkit where they seem to make a bit more sense to incorporate them. So this document generally has had a bit of a revamp. In terms of competence, a brief one, we revamped the form used to capture information about the levels of competence of role holders. So this is moving away from a questionnaire approach where you'd kind of send the form to the person to fill it in themselves to a more interview-based approach where the information is collected in cooperation effectively with the person that's fulfilling the role. And it was felt that that was probably a more appropriate way of doing it within an organization, with a bit of managerial input to make sure that the picture of competence for a particular role holder is more accurate and more agreed than perhaps previously. In terms of internal audits, some of the documents in the internal audit section of the toolkit have been renamed to clarify their purpose, to align a little bit more with the standard. And we've got a new format audit schedule as well, which we've put a little bit of work into that. And there's a dashboard associated with the schedule. So we've tried to make that a bit more useful and to show a bit more information about the audits that are coming up and a bit more control over the audit program and schedule. And we've also created a corrective action plan for after the certification audit. If there are any non-conformities found, you have to submit a corrective action plan quite often to the certification body. So we've provided a template around that. Management review. Previously, we had a document that recommended a kind of a two-stage management review, an annual one, and then sort of possibly quarterly. We've simplified that. So basically, you specify the frequency of the management review, but there's a single process now for management reviews. The previous one caused a little bit of confusion. As always, it's a case of trying to follow the requirements of the standard as accurately as possible, and it's always a balance with toolkit documents as to how far we go in incorporating best practice. Because what we want to do is produce a toolkit that helps an organization become certified. And if we introduce too many additional things, then sometimes the focus can be a little bit blurred. So sometimes we have to come back to the requirements in the standard. In terms of objectives, so we created a new tool to provide for the definition and tracking of progress against objectives. Previously, this was in a Word document. We've taken it out into an Excel spreadsheet to provide a bit more flexibility and a bit more information around objectives. Okay. Segregation of duties. This is an interesting one. We used to have a different form, which I think I was probably the only person in the world that thought it was a good form. Nobody else seemed to. We had quite a lot of support questions about this, about the definition of and the breakdown of a process, and then the decision making process to decide which of the steps in a process needed to be segregated, so done by different people. So it can be a difficult thing to define. The previous form was causing lots of confusion, so we've basically simplified that. So hopefully the new form will be easier to use. So it's easier to decide which processes need to have an element of segregation with them, and also which of the individual steps need to be segregated. So a classic example is perhaps in terms of creating a new user, you might have one person that would create the user, another person decides on what level of authorities they get permissions. One of the other areas is principles for engineering secure systems. So this is one of the controls within Annex A. The document we provide in the toolkit was previously based on a NIST publication. In fact, it was an annex of one of the 800 series in NIST, which was a good document, and it's all very useful information. Maybe a little bit too involved for most purposes. So we've simplified this document and identified some of the key principles, information security principles, that are probably more applicable to the majority of our customers, really, in most organizations. The other problem we had was that the NIST document kept changing, so we were always sort of one step behind the particular appendix, and so we had a lot of feedback in terms of this isn't the latest version, etc. So what we're trying to do here is to simplify this, and again, it meets the requirements without going a step further. Okay, so that was some of those things. So clarifying risk assessment is another area that we've updated in version 13. So this is really to do with the flow of risk assessment and just picking out a particular aspect, which I'll go through. So let's have a look at this in particular. So one of the things that we've made clearer in the toolkit is the fact that you really need to be doing two types of risk assessment for the purposes of 27001. The first being the risks and opportunities to the ISMS itself, and the second being the more classic information security risk assessment. So whereas before we'd encouraged and implied that the ISMS risks would be incorporated in the information security risk assessment, which worked pretty well, but we wanted to split this out and make it a bit clearer. So we've now created a document which separates out the ISMS risks and opportunities. So these are things that would stop the ISMS from achieving its objectives. So it's things like on the screen there in terms of lack of resources, timescales, key people, etc. So it's really making it clear that that type of risk assessment needs to be done. And then in terms of the actual information security risk assessment, we've made a couple of tweaks on this as well. One is to add a column to the reference controls tab of the risk assessment tool to allow for the noting of which risks make use of each of the Annex A controls. So this is really, you'll know that within the risk assessment, you'll specify which of the Annex A controls are relevant to that risk. And this is really flagging the other way round. So this is useful when we come to create the statement of applicability in terms of whether and why a control is applicable or not applicable. So in terms of the statement of applicability, we're really justifying the inclusion of a control based on the risk assessment. It's an interesting area with this that there's always been kind of two ways of doing the statement of applicability. One is to go through each of the Annex A controls and state whether they're applicable or not applicable, and then put a justification in the third column. So, for example, if the control is to do with mobile device policy, then you might say, well, okay, we do have mobile devices, so therefore this control is applicable. Now that's been perfectly acceptable. We've done it that way in the past, and it's been reviewed by auditors, etc. And so that's not an incorrect way of doing it. But the other way, having gone into ISO 27005, which is about information security risk assessment, and the prevailing opinion within the industry seems to be at the moment that there needs to be a clearer linkage between the statement of applicability and the risk assessment. So in order to say that a particular control is applicable, there needs to be a risk in your risk assessment that requires that control or uses that control in order to mitigate that risk. So we've provided the opportunity within the statement of applicability to say that all of the controls that are listed as applicable are referenced in the risk assessment. So we're strengthening, if you like, the link between the statement of applicability and the risk assessment. It's an area that there are different points of view about this. Certainly, I say if you read 27005, it's fairly clear, but from an auditing and certification point of view, it's not something that I've come across that has been particularly, definitely required by auditors. So again, I'm sure there'll be a lot of discussion about this issue, but that's where we've done it. A couple of other changes to statement of applicability as well. In terms of implementation of the controls, as well as yes and no, we've also are now allowed partially. So if a control has started to be implemented but is not completed yet. So it allows a little bit more flexibility there. Lastly, on risk assessment, we've also used the term event-based now rather than scenario-based. You'll recall that there are effectively two ways provided within the toolkit of doing a risk assessment. One is the classic asset-based risk assessment. So that's where you have an asset, a threat, and a vulnerability. And the other is what we previously called scenario-based, but we've now changed that term to be event-based to align it again with the terminology used in the latest version of ISO 27005. The reason for that is we try to use the same terminology in order to make sure that things are consistent across the ISO standards and the toolkit. Okay, let's move on then to supplier management. So this is an area that we've looked at within version 13. We've created quite a number of new documents in this area, which you'll see on the list on the right hand side here. What we're trying to do with this, I mean, within previous versions of the toolkit, we'd addressed specific controls to do with supplier management by using specific documents. was part of the feedback was to try and coordinate these documents more, so there was more of a life cycle approach to security within the supply chain. So we've created an overall information security process for supplier relationships, which brings together the existing documents and also has a few more to show an end-to-end approach to information security within supplier relationships, through from the initial contracting of a supplier and due diligence, through the review of on a regular basis of suppliers to make sure that the due diligence aspects remain true, going through to the eventual offboarding of a supplier. So we've added some more procedures and checklists and so on in there, in order to make that a more consistent process and one which you can use for general management, information security aspects of management of suppliers. Okay, let's talk about policies. So obviously there's a lot of policies in the toolkit. Most of them are topic specific. So we have an overarching information security policy, and then we have a series of topic specific policies. I think we're to a position where we've got over 40 policies available within the toolkit now on particular topics of information security. What we've done in this release is we've ensured that they all consistently contain the same key items of information. We're talking about things like scope, audience, and the things on the slide here. Previously, it was a little bit hit and miss. Consistency is very important to us in terms of the toolkit in many different respects. So we felt it's a good time to have a look through and just make sure that all of these things are addressed correctly within each of the policies. We've also slimmed down some of the policies in some respects. So there were a few that were probably more wordy than was required. Some of the background information has been taken out to make them more focused again, and a little bit shorter. In a few cases, content that's relevant to users has been separated out into a new policy. So we had the odd policy where some of it applied to, for example, ICT staff and users at the same time. So we've taken that out so that the audience for the policy is a bit clearer and a bit more flexible. We've also created an incident management policy, which previously wasn't in the toolkit as well. In terms of privacy, the controls concerned with privacy have previously within the toolkit been largely written around the requirements of the EU GDPR, largely because that was probably the most well-known privacy law around, and also probably the most comprehensive around. Things are continuously moving in the area of privacy, and I'm sure, as we all know, in terms of new laws coming out and amendments to laws in other countries. So in this release, what we tried to do with some of the privacy related documents is to make them more generally applicable, and reduce the specificity. I can't say the word specificity, is that word, make them less specific anyway to the GDPR, because GDPR is not the only privacy law around. So in countries such as Australia, the US obviously is a very evolving privacy picture with state specific laws and the possibility of federal law as well, depending on what happens over the next few years. It's a very fast moving change. So what we've done is, in terms of, say, the policies, we've tried to introduce more content around other countries than the EU, and also in terms of things like breach notification periods and so on. Again, we've tried to incorporate a bit more flexibility so that if the GDPR doesn't apply to your operations, or if more likely situation, if you're an international organization, then if multiple privacy legislation is relevant to your business operations, then you need to incorporate the provisions of each of those things within your procedures. Other changes, really there's always a number of other changes that we make. So we've corrected any typos, or there was the odd occasion where we had still a reference to the 2013 version of the 27001 standard. We've also updated the documents in the toolkit that refer to the total document set. So the toolkit index, for example, gives a list of the particular requirements of the standard that each document addresses. So we've updated that obviously with the new documents and any changes we've made, and the documentation log and so on, so it's a clear picture of the documents that are in the toolkit. There's a lot of other changes that we've made as well to clarify content in particular documents and update them as well to keep them current and to also take account of changes we've made in other places of the document. So when we get to the release notes, which are included in the toolkit, you'll see that there's a lot of these documents that have got some comments against them in terms of changes that have been made. So we like to try and make sure that it's clear in terms of the changes that have been made to particular documents. All the policies, as I say, have been updated, and there's various tweaks and things all over a lot of the documents. So it's quite a significant update. Some of our updates in the past have been relatively minor. This is a little bit more than, it's not quite the same level as the previous update, which was taking the toolkit from the 2013 version of the standard to the 2022. It's not on that level, but it's quite a significant follow-up from that. So we're hoping it's useful. So in conclusion, what we're trying to do with this update to version 13 is maintain the essence of the existing toolkit. So we're not trying to change it completely. We're trying to take the things, maintain the things that seem to be working well based on the feedback that we've been given, and maintain the ideally the usability and the sort of common sense aspects of the toolkit. So we're not trying to change any of those, but what we are trying to do is enhance the content in those areas that need to be updated. We're introducing a bit more consistency in some areas as well. We're trying to focus, as I said, on the particular requirements. So we're trying to create a toolkit and a set of documents that's useful, that helps you to meet the requirements, but doesn't give you the impression you've got to go a lot further than the requirements, because often that's not particularly helpful at that time. It's something you might want to do when you're certified, but when you're focused on gaining certification, it's really meeting the requirements that you really want to focus on. So overall, what we're trying to do is add value to the toolkit and sort of evolve it in the direction that we need to, based on feedback, as I say, from various sources, and hopefully that will help in terms of the usability and usefulness of the toolkit. Okay, that was what I was going to say really in terms of the version 13. Just to go through in terms of how CertiKit can help you. So obviously, as I've said quite a few times, we do toolkits. You may have gathered that by now. So obviously, we offer a perpetual license with our toolkit. So once you've bought the toolkit, then there's nothing else to pay. And we have an ongoing support package, including unlimited email support. So you can always drop us a line with those support questions. As I say, we love to receive those and we love to answer them, and they provide a very useful source of improvements to the toolkits as well. We do updates, and so once you bought the toolkit, the updates are available free of charge. If you want us to, we can review up to 3 completed documents as well when you're going through the process of implementing the standard within your organization. If you've got some documents that you want a bit of feedback on, we can certainly do that. We also have a logo replacer service. So you'll be aware that with the toolkits, you need to replace the logo and the organization name and so on as well. Most people don't have a problem with that, but if you want that to be replaced all in one go, this is really after you've just bought the toolkit, then we can take your logo and your organization name, and we can sort of batch update all of the documents so that what you start with is a documentation set that has your logo and your organization name in. So that can help quite often. We also now provide a variety of services. So we can provide a gap assessment, implementation services. If you're at a stage where you need to be doing some internal auditing ready for certification, then we can help. We can come in and we can fulfill the internal auditing requirements of the standard as well. And more recently, we also have a cyber awareness training platform, which you may be aware of, which covers not only awareness training in terms of videos and so on, and a managed program where you can make sure that all of your users are up to date and receiving regular video training about things like mobile devices and phishing and so on. But it also includes modules to do with phishing simulation, so sending out phishing emails to basically educate users about what those emails look like. Breach monitoring, so going on the dark web and seeing which of your email addresses or passwords may have been already breached, and taking account of that. There's an element of policy management in the tool as well. So in terms of sending out policy documents, making sure that users have read them and then recording the fact that they've seen the documents. And there's a lot of real-time reporting around that to really bring together all of those elements, which is obviously quite important with the 27001 ISMS approach.